conference on leadership, and the leader spoke of a book that he wrote called Canoeing the Mountains. Has anyone ever heard of it? Canoeing the Mountains? You should read it. It's phenomenal. It's a great book. And this public speaker, he got up, it was a 4-hour seminar on his book and leadership in a Christian context, and one of the best public speakers I've ever seen. I mean, the guy, he had everybody for all that time. I mean, it was just good, great. So I'm going to use some of it today. What a surprise, because it's relevant. And we're going to talk a little bit about history, and then we're going to talk about the Transfiguration. And I think we're going to start with a story that I think you know, Lois and Clark. Right? Anyone heard of those guys before? What did they do? What?
We're explorers.
Explorers? Okay. Yeah, they were.
West.
West. Yeah, they were 19th century, early 1800s, 1804, 1806 explorers. And they set out at the behest of I want to say, oh gosh, I'm confusing Thomas Jefferson with Ben Franklin. It would be Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, Jefferson, okay. Yeah, Lewis was Jefferson's understudy, and many people thought that Jefferson was the brightest star in the world at the time, right? Many people thought he was brilliant. He was. He wrote a couple things that may have impacted you and I. That was a joke. But so he was his understudy, and so he wanted to make sure that this brilliant individual would go explore the West. And he also knew Lewis well enough to know that he couldn't do it by himself, because Lewis was a bit crazy, right? Do we all know what happened to him? Anyone know? Yeah, he committed suicide. Yeah, Clark wrote with him. And so they set out, and they had set out with the best information that they had at the time, that they were going to head west to try and find a water route in the Pacific Ocean. And that had been sort of the common knowledge that there was such a thing for about 300 years. So the best guesses were for 300 years, we're going to find a water route in the Pacific Ocean. And there would be reasons for this. They'd be economic, provide national stability, all sorts of things, right? So they thought, we've got some rivers here, and they thought the geography of the United States at the time, which wasn't the United States out there yet, but that was something like this. There was a long, slow way up, and then a slow way down, right? And so they did much of their travel in the Missouri River. It took about 15 months to get west, and they did so by canoe. And they, Lewis and Clark, they had a couple of interpreters with them. Clark brought his slave named York. And York, on this expedition, was a full participant. So he was no longer a slave on this expedition. He had say in what would happen, and as we'll hear later, more say than we probably know. And so they get to the point where they thought was a peak, and they thought on the other side of this peak, we're going to put in our canoes and just slide on out to the Pacific Ocean. And so they get there with these canoes, and what they see are what they call the most horrible mountain range they've ever seen. Along the way, they had been talking to native peoples who said, yeah, there are mountains, but they had thought of the rounded tops of the East Coast, stuff that they could, navigate pretty easy. But if you've ever been out west and seen the mountains, the Colorado Mountains and everything, it's a little bit more significant than a couple hills. They're snow-capped. They're 300 miles to the west coast. There are 90-mile stretches where there would have been 4 feet of snow on the ground. Right? So here they are with their canoes, and they need to find a way through this mess. And honestly, they could have stopped, right? They probably should have, because their mission was to find a water route. They obviously weren't going to find it, but they decided to forgo their orders, and they were military expeditions, so they discarded their orders, and they had a famous Native American that they met. Does anyone know who this person was? Sacagawea, right? How many times did Lewis write down what Sacagawea wrote or said on the mission in his journals? Never. He never wrote a word down, I should say, which is interesting. So the only way to get through this mountain range was to trust someone they didn't know. Right? A native girl who had had essentially been lost from her tribe, taken, kidnapped, right? And so we think of Lois and Clark as these bad dudes who are like into these burly explorers who are going to climb the mountain, right? What's interesting about Sacagawea? What's that?
What did you say?
What's interesting about Sacagawea as opposed to Lewis and Clark?
14 years old,
She had a baby and she was a nursing mom, right? So she did everything that Lewis and Clark did with a baby while nursing. Just, hold that in your mind. Which is pretty tough, apparently. So they had to listen to a stranger. And she led them to a tribe where they could trade in their canoes for horses. Kind of valuable, I'd say. And I mean, how many times do we get to that point where, like, we brought canoes, we're using the canoes, right? That's the story of the church. And so they finally get horses and they make this long journey. They head and they get out to the west coast. And one of the most remarkable things that I think ever happened that we don't talk about enough, and maybe you know this story better than I did, which I know now. That was confusing, sorry. Is that when they get to the west coast, they are on an expedition for the United States, right? So they have the flag with them. And this is an interesting little wrinkle in this story. They have to decide where to put the flag down, and where the flag goes is the full vested authority of the United States, as it was then. So how did they put the flag down? Anyone know? Nobody knows how you're going to look at this. But how did they put it down? Not where, how?
I thought they put it on, like, stuck it in the sand.
They stuck it in the sand? Okay, well, I'll tell you how they did it. This is remarkable. They had a vote. And everybody there voted. A slave voted. A Native American voted. Lewis voted. Clark voted. Where are we going to put the flag? And there's something about that mission, right? Where, I mean, and they were broken folks, right? I mean, Lewis and Clark, they had slaves and all that. Everything that, is difficult to wrestle with in that period. But they gave a vote. That's a powerful thing. Where to put the flag? Where's the United States going to be? How about here? I mean, it's remarkable. And so here they are, they take a vote, and then they're on this mission, and there's something about them being on the mission that says, I mean, pardon my language, screw everything else. We're out here, we're all doing this together, we're all people together, we all get a say, we all get a vote, right? And then on their way back, they defied orders again. Because they put down the flag because they had to live out of winter in Oregon, which was probably not very nice. And then on their way back, Lewis and Clark decided to break their orders again, and they split up when coming back through the mountains. They each went different ways, which was a defiance of what their mandate was to stay together, because they wanted to see more. They were explorers. They wanted to try new paths. And so they come back, they tell what they've told, and then York, Clark's slave, says, I'd like to go to a different town because that's where my family is. And then Clark beats him. Right? So they come back to where they're from. Everything's the same thing. Right? But on that mission, there was something else. So I want to use this story. It's an amazing story, right? And it ends not in the way you want it to, but then things happen along the way that you don't expect. And so. And then Lewis, I said, commits suicide, which is later in life, which is tragic. But, so, think of the disciples this morning.